Hello boys and girls, I'm David Toth, and welcome to a review of Vocaloid. Vocaloid is a vocal synthesizer program that gained an exponential wave of popularity starting around 2008, and, depending on your definition of success, continuing to today. It works by painstakingly sampling an individual's voice with references to every phoneme of a given language, and uses software to turn those samples into singing with the directions of the user. While any average street bum probably knows Hatsune Miku, there are dozens of official voice banks made using the Vocaloid sampling process and synthesizer program, encompassing many different identities that have seen varying levels of fame. But more importantly than the literal bones of its mechanics, Vocaloid is something else, something bigger, meatier. I come to you today not trying to claim that I've unearthed any great truth about the world or life, but I do at least think I've discovered something about Vocaloid, or, if nothing else, something about myself. Vocaloid is a diorama of humanity. In writing this, I pondered for a long time about how to best simply describe Vocaloid. I could call it an instrument, a special synthesizer that lets any random Joe, regardless of their ability to sing, make music with a vocal line. I could call it a photograph, taking such legendary musicians as Leah and Megumi Nakajima, and creating from them a unique soul with a timbre that would never fade. For a long time, I considered calling it a canvas, in which many dozens, hundreds of people have, with fingers dyed in every shade of visible light, created a portrait of Babel, reflecting everything and nothing at once. And while all of these are true, I think that more than anything, to me, it's just us. It's a mirror. When I gaze deep into the silver, I see both what I am and once was. If I stared long enough, I would likely see who I'll someday be as well. I have listened to Vocaloid since I was 10 years old. I've written hundreds of thousands of words about Vocaloid songs online and during my undergrad. I have localized dozens of Vocaloid songs for both my friends and for people I long admired in adolescence. And I've even composed many bad Vocaloid songs myself, in an attempt to greater understand both it and the me that drives me deep within my being. At times, Miku was a dear friend to me. At times, Ia a storyteller more deft than Dickens or Hemingway. At times, Gumi a poet I loved unrequitedly, lingering just out of reach. And Miki, a diva that rocked the foundations of my soul. And so today, I will look at Vocaloid. I'll look at my Vocaloid as it is and was. As a wonderland captivating a child, a Pulitzer Prize-winning novel speaking to a teenager, and a nostalgia dear and lost to an adult. I couldn't possibly review Vocaloid by just talking about the software itself, or even the music. To review Vocaloid is to review what Vocaloid meant, and how that meaning changed over time. And so, let's begin. Not with the morose ramblings of an overly verbose 25-year-old pretending to know literally anything about life, but with the fascination of a child who would soon learn to very dearly love the world. I was 10 years old when I, by complete chance, stumbled upon the bedrock for what would eventually lead to me becoming the visual novel-crunching lunatic I am today. For no reason I can logically deduce aside from the simple fact that I was 10, I had a deep fascination with swords at the time, and so, on one sweaty summer day, I checked out a book from my local public library just because it seemed to have a man with a sword on its cover, and that was the picturesque definition of cool to my 5th grade brain. I was certainly not the most discerning 10-year-old though, as the book was actually a volume of manga, and the sword on the cover of Busou Renkin Volume 1 was more a lance, if anything. But regardless of my lacking visual comprehension, the end result was that I was left spellbound. At that ground zero moment, I'd yet to become a bookworm. But in comparison to the few pieces that we had read in school, I found the Shonen Action series far more captivating. And as I watched my first anime because my library didn't have anything beyond the first 3 volumes of Busou Renkin, and as I read my first manga online because that same library didn't have all of the Sand Chronicles, this vital comparison continued to ring true. Japanese stuff was just more interesting. I found the action enthralling, the characters and themes deeper and more complex, or at least as deep and complex as a 10-year-old possibly could claim to understand, than the comparative things I saw in Western fiction. And as I started listening to Japanese music more and more as I consumed more anime, one fateful day, I saw it. My very first Vocaloid song. It was Fear Garden, and I thought it was absolutely terrible. The vocals sounded trill, the art freaked me out, and I found it to be an awful overall experience. Honestly, it's a miracle I ever chose to listen to another Vocaloid song after that. Don't get me wrong, I get it now. But boy howdy, that song wasn't what 10-year-old me wanted out of music. And, it's still not what I really want out of music today, but that's neither here nor there. But then, I saw my second Vocaloid song, and my life would actually change course for real this time, as I basked in the significance of his existence, the all-time classic of Love and Duty. Mothy's Servant of Evil. As a point of comparison, my general concept of music at the time consisted of two things: listening to the kids blasting We Are Who We Are and Hey Soul Sister on the bus to and from school every day, and playing really dumbed down arrangements of classical songs in my childhood orchestra. Relative to the baby finger painting of those things, Servant of Evil was like stumbling my way fully into the paintings lining the Sistine Chapel. While, make no mistake, I was still an idiot, I could immediately tell that Servant of Evil was something special. It spoke to me in the same way that a lot of Green Day songs and The Cat's in the Cradle and the Silver Spoon had prior. They were all songs that had something to say, and in Servant of Evil's case, a whole story to tell. While I certainly failed to grasp the full significance of absolutely anything at all, I could still tell that I was listening to something a whole step above everything else I'd heard. That's how my journey into Vocaloid began, clumsily bumping into songs in the Avelius Chronicles and being stunned at just how vibrant the world could be. Even today, I still think Servant of Evil was a meaty song, portraying some serious gray morality and getting the listener to empathize with someone of truly dubious values. It's a story about a servant to a young queen, who dutifully fulfills her every order, even as those orders become increasingly spiteful and deranged. Eventually, when their kingdom has had enough of a teenager destroying their livelihood, the citizens throw a coup on the monarchy, and in a final act of love, the servant disguises himself as the queen, his sister, and dies in her place, letting her escape and live on. The sacrifice is enough to ground the queen, make her question her stance, and, at the very least, realize that she truly loved the brother who died for her as well. Writing today, I do think that Alan Avedonian was a bad person. But like with many bad people, he was a bad man who genuinely had the capacity to love and regret. While I'd criticize his morals, I also have to respect his dedication to his family and capacity to forgive. There are many more meaningful Vocaloid songs to me, even within the Avelius Chronicles. Wooden Girl Thousand Year Viking Lied in particular is just as masterful as anything Andrew Lloyd Webber ever put on Broadway. But the important thing is that I just said about 20 times more words about Servant of Evil than I ever could say about We Are Who We Are, all while just brushing against the surface of a really wonderful composition. And as I grew older and more into Vocaloid, this trend only further solidified itself. At first, I was drawn to pieces with stories and characters, like Alice Human Sacrifice and Alluring Seeker Black Vow, before growing to favor pieces that explored an emotion or critiqued the world as I went to middle school and high school. I got on Nico Nico Doga, falling completely into the otaku subculture at the time. Touhou became my favorite game series, mostly just because it was free and something that even my potato PC could run on. I became privy to all the stupid memes at the time, and while I didn't watch The Idolmaster until many years after that subculture petered out and died, I can proudly state that it's genuinely one of my favorite shows ever, and I would happily let Amami Haruka kill me. All throughout this time, though, Vocaloid remained king. There's something wonderful about the concept of Vocaloid itself that really shined through the songs coming out. Vocaloid sampled from the talents all over the scope of the Japanese music industry. From pop idols like Macross Frontier's Megumi Nakajima, to the beautiful ballads of the legendary Leah, or even the indulgent rock of Genesis Gact Final Fantasy himself, Vocaloid crystallized these voices and brought them down and into the layman's home. Instead of Hey Soul Sister, which counterintuitively lacks a soul in spite of being created by a whole swath of individuals, many Vocaloid songs were made through the efforts of just one or two people with something they wanted to say, and I can really feel the heart in that even to this day. Without being limited by the actual ability to sing, anyone could write a song. This meant that there were a lot of little silly songs, fun things that indulged in the meta fact that they were Vocaloid to begin with, things like the Miku Miku Nishite Agaru's of the world. But it also meant that there were countless little meaningful gems that spoke to what was important to specific people. Since anyone could write music, what resulted was the music of everyone. Songs, PVs, remixes, covers, everything was done by a web of individuals, who all only took action because something struck a chord in them and forced them to care. It made a community. Everyone took a look at the songs around them and said, I want a piece of this. We pocketed countless little pieces like this, sculpting from them an approximate bust of ourselves in the process. And it wasn't just the big heady pieces that mattered. I Don't Care Who, Somebody Just Date Me is at least as meaningful and artful a piece of media in the cultural mural of the time as anything on the mandatory reading list of a high school English 2 class, and I mean that with total sincerity. I could watch Servant of Evil with 5 different PVs, 3 or 4 different arrangements, and countless covers by Vocaloid and Utaite alike, and could feel that everything was done out of love. It really made me feel connected with my fellow man. Even as my language, nationality, and age differed with those of the people producing these things, the heart of the matter, that love, was the same. I remember in high school once, I was having a conversation with the only friend I had who listened to Vocaloid. She was an upperclassman who was way better than me in violin and had blonde hair so light, yet so fitting, that I, to this day, have no idea if it was natural. We talk about Vocaloid basically every time we saw each other, and would always warm up before orchestra by playing a swath of Vocaloid songs on our instruments. I still remember the earth-shaking terror I felt when, as a freshman, I was playing Servant of Evil on my violin and she asked me what the song was. This was before we were friends, and so I pretended not to remember the name, not wanting to have to explain myself to a stranger, and terrified, perplexingly, of being sincere with myself. Before, she pointed a finger at me and, with a childlike joy that I may have quite literally never felt in my life, smiled and said, "That's Servant of Evil." But anyways, I remember talking once about how, with Vocaloid, there was basically a song for everything. Glow by Kino so thoroughly captured the feeling of bitterness and self-hatred in the face of time and loss. Irony by Scott a feeling of listlessness with regard to oneself and the future. Neru's works a pulsating dissatisfaction for the ways of the world and your place in it, and Nikki a love for its beauty even so. The highs were so high and the lows so painfully, brutally low, that I questioned how I would ever understand the world without Vocaloid. I truly do not think that I would cry the same, or love the same, without having been taught those emotions through music. Through the individually placed notes of other people who had something they wanted to share, who needed some way of conveying the truths they found in their chest. My upperclassmen and I shared our experiences at the time, a microcosm of the community at large. We'd share songs, opinions, feelings, and joys, growing to understand both Vocaloid and each other more. It was simple, stupid, and enjoyable for sure. I didn't know it at the time, but high school would be a major turning point for both my relationship with Vocaloid and for Vocaloid itself. It would be a time in which Vocaloid would take its first massive step away from what it once was and into something else. And as my upperclassmen graduated and I continued to reach out into the world, it would become not just my favorite kind of music, but the most important kind of media in my life. A review of Vocaloid would be thoroughly incomplete without analyzing the most complex, confusing, and beautiful product in the medium, the ever-elusive song series. As Vocaloid pushed into the 2010s, spearheaded by the Evelius Chronicles, there was a sudden spike in producers using not just one, but a whole baker's dozen worth of songs at a time to tell a bigger, overarching story with characters who would go through full, complex arcs. The ambition on the part of the composers would prove infectious, and the projects would gain dedicated artists and writers to help them along, increasing the budget and production value over time. There was the thriller murder mystery, Shuen no Shiori, the violent teenage war with one of the cutest songs about lesbians ever, the Heisei Project, a happy-go-lucky story about magic teenagers and the joy of being alive, Mikagura School Suite, and the bleak tale of justice and hypocrisy, Nostalgia for Nothingness. These series were big, pushing the medium to its limits and redefining what was possible with music. With each new song, production values kept getting bigger. Fans would spend hours and days trying to solve mysteries and guess trajectories, falling in love with characters and compositions all the while. Telling these stories through music made it really easy to empathize with the plights of the characters. With nothing more than 3 or 4 minutes in a poem, you could get a pretty thorough understanding of what kind of person any given character was, all based on what the lyrics had to say about them and what kind of music they had in accompaniment. You need neither be a scholar or a psychiatrist, for instance, to deduce that Ichinomiya Erina is the exact kind of ADHD-stricken airhead that can't help but live every second of her life to its fullest, and I, or just about anyone else, could tell that from just the sound of Hokugo Stride. The music made it easy to get a feel for who characters were, and consequentially, to grow attached to them. Because if music is or was good for anything, it was conveying emotion. And I received those emotions loud and clear. I listened to all of these songs. I read Shuen no Shiori's honestly excellent manga and still lament to this day that the story never really finished. I watched Mikagura School Suite's bizarrely ugly anime. The projects kept getting bigger, and for a time it seemed like Vocaloid was king. Like it was this whole new medium of storytelling that would consume everything, even dipping into the mainstream with manga and anime adaptations for the masses. And, of course, I'd be remiss not to talk about the most important of all of these projects. The story about magic teenagers, immortal snake women, death, rebirth, love, and loss. Proprietor of a manga, anime, light novel series, weird-ass movie, radio drama, and owner of my heart and soul, Jin's Kagero Project. The Kagero Project is a story about a group of children wrestling with the untimely reality of death and fighting against a reaper who doesn't represent loss, but rather the rejection of loss and inability to cope. It has time travel, murder, suicide, and depression right alongside love, sacrifice, and redemption. The series is rather famously hard to understand, as Jin made the questionable choice to split it up over many different mediums. Unless some crazy person actually bothered buying and reading a 13-volume manga, a whole series of light novels, and multiple albums, there wouldn't be any way for them to fully understand the story or its characters. However, I am exactly that crazy, and the Kagura Project is one of my favorite stories ever. The plot is bananas, but the characters are overflowing with heart, and each one develops more over the course of the story's many timelines than most full casts do in other narratives. This is helped along by the music itself, which is well composed, each detailing the personalities and struggles of the characters, with art by the insanely talented Shido and Wanyampu accompanying them and bringing them to life. I could and have spoken for hours about the Kagura Project. I think even the whack anime Mecha City Actors is pretty good if and only if you've seen all the other parts of the story. I could exposit about how Takane Enomoto is one of my favorite characters ever written, how Aino's Theory of Happiness is one of the best songs ever written, how Volume 12 of Kagero Days is one of the best tankamans manga I own, and how Summertime Reload is one of the best books I've ever read. The Kagura Project is a mess and is riddled with plot holes, but I'd be damned if it isn't masterful regardless. To the teenage me, the dawn and arrival of all of these song series felt like I was a child at an amusement park. Vocaloid was just as fascinating and vibrant as it was when I first got into it, and I followed plenty of series, theorizing about the stories in comment sections and waiting with bated breath for every new song that ever came out. All of this momentum, though, was never going to last. The Kagura Project ended its official music run with Summertime Record, a beautiful piece of music that still makes me feel emotional to this day. But around the same time, Mikagura finished its anime. The Heisei Project and Shun no Shiori turned to their novels before dissolving into dust. One by one, each of these projects ended or fizzled out without any grand fanfare or farewell. Song series had not become this new, lasting norm. They were a fad that, one day, as fads do, faded away. It felt like one day I looked around and suddenly everything was gone. Expectations had gone too high. Keeping long series of music going was exhausting and expensive, and eventually the trend died out. It was only then I realized that all of the fun I had with these projects came at a price of something else too. Kagero, Heisei, Mikagura, and even Avilius all changed the face of Vocaloid. In 2013, Lost Time Memory was the most popular song in Nico Nico Doga's Vocaloid rankings. The general idea of Vocaloid shifted from being something like Rolling Girl to something like Outer Science, and this said a lot about the people behind the music. Namely, that the little amateur touches of individuals began to fade away. When people began expecting long and complex series, they turned away from singles made by just some guy at home after work or school. When they expect Shido's amazing detailed PVs, then individuals aren't going to make fan PVs or get as involved in the community. We lose these little perspectives and interpretations. Song series took hold. A lot of the big producers who didn't choose to engage in them started bands without Vocaloid, and when all was said and done, Vocaloid was more popular than ever, but without any of the traits that made it special to begin with. It's not like Vocaloid songs stopped coming out, or that individuals didn't occasionally share something unique. There was a lull in the late 2010s, but going into 2020, Vocaloid is once again spiked, arguably being at its most popular ever. This too has come with a shift in style. As opposed to being a necessary tool of an indie artist, Vocaloid is more like a stylistic choice now, made by labels and a few big-name legacy producers. But without the voices of lone people ringing out through the music, was it even Vocaloid anymore? In 2018, the Avelius Chronicles ended and I was a college student. What first got me into the idea of Vocaloid had come to a close with Master of the Heavenly Yard, a 15-minute long behemoth of a song that feels like watching Broadway. It's amazing, the culmination of stories of dozens of characters and plots. In particular, Luvia shooting the black box out of the sky is a powerful image that resonates with me to this day, and hearing the Rebirthday tune at the climax was a masterful choice on Mothy's part. Though, with even Avilius, a key pillar of Vocaloid since 2009 gone, I once again ask, what even is Vocaloid anymore? The answer is, of course, that it's just something different. Kanaria, all of the Kafu users, and whatever Ghost in the Shell Deco 27 has become are what Vocaloid is now. In the wake of individuals making music in their room, and teams telling massive stories over the course of years, Vocaloid has shifted to being singles, oftentimes short at just 2 or 3 minutes long, focusing on having a catchy tune over anything particularly complex to say. The text will tend to be common ideas about lost or toxic love, or a non-specific idea about being happy or sad. They're not quite the world-enlightening poetries of the past, but the text is hardly the point. Nowadays, Miku is a pop star like any other, and Vocaloid is just that. Pop music. In 2008, Miku was a special secret friend of a couple weirdos on Nico Nico Doga. And in 2023, Miku was instead one of the first things I saw upon getting off my airplane in Japan, signposting the country at large. Her face was on CDs at Tower Records, and plastered over all sorts of goods and animate. Miku was normal. I confess here that I don't like Vocaloid as much anymore. That's not to say that I don't have producers that I love. Kazuma Toda is a genuine genius and one of my favorite composers ever, and Neji Shiki continues to stun me with every song they make, with how diverse a sound profile they have while still touching on fascinating ideas. But the general tone of things just isn't the same. Vocaloid isn't indie, it's pop. It isn't the hard work of a bunch of clear individuals. It's made for the lowest common denominator so as to get mass appeal, and in that, it's successful. People like Deco27 are genuine stars, but it's not what I want from music. For a long time, I didn't understand this. I sat, lost, for hours on end, wondering what wasn't right, why I couldn't like Vocaloid anymore. Vocaloid, the thing that made me love music and get better at violin, the thing that accompanied me through my happiest highs and lowest lows. I still remember learning to grieve with Glow, and understanding just how much I could love someone with 1/6 that of gravity. So what changed? Evidently, I'm still not that much brighter than I was when I mistakenly picked up that volume of manga in my library, though, because the answer is obvious. Poa Poa P and Wowaka died. Ryo and Hachi started actual bands and become wildly successful in their own right. Nikki and Neru basically don't make music anymore, and countless other small producers have gone to do something else too. The song series are gone. Jin, Shidu, and Wanyampu are gone. Most producers don't even use Kaito, Meiko, Rin, Len, or Luca anymore, and Gumi is not that much better off. When I looked at myself, not liking the current fads, trying to explain why they didn't hit as hard as the older, simpler works, I eventually realized that, whether or not I was right, I had simply gotten old. I'm not a 10-year-old, first finding out how wonderful Vocaloid can be with the rest of the world. I'm not a high schooler sharing my hobby with my upperclassmen, or even a college student writing essays and trans lyrics with joy, hoping to convey my love to someone else. To quote a great moment from one of the worst Rocky movies, nature is smarter than people think. Little by little, we lose our friends. We lose everything. We keep losing and losing till we say, you know, what the hell am I living around here for? For a long time, I lamented this. I complained to my new friends about how things weren't the same, how I couldn't have fun the same way I did as a kid. But that's just the course of life. Nothing's going to stay the same, and eventually you'll look around and realize that it's gone. What am I still doing here, you'll say. And that'll be that. I said that without Vocaloid, I'm not sure how I would understand joy or sadness like I do today. Well, I'm equal parts joyful and sad to say that Vocaloid has also taught me something vital about the flow of time. Things will change. Things will pass you by. I didn't mind when the indie producers left at first, because I had the song series to entertain me, but eventually those too left and I didn't like what Vocaloid shifted into in the meantime. You cannot fight time, and eventually everything will go away, replaced with something else. In spite of being one of my best friends at the time, I haven't spoken to that blonde upperclassman with the fascinatingly pale hair in years. I've left my hometown and that library behind. Most of the people I spoke to in high school and college have faded from my life, and while a part of me laments all of these things, I'm old enough, an adult now, to see that that's just how life goes most of the time. Yet, while I only like a tiny handful of modern producers, while it's hard for me to say that I'm a fan of Vocaloid in the same way the kids would, I still listen to Vocaloid all the time. The tracks that I loved can still make me feel not wholly dissimilar to how they did when I first heard them. To quote the 2008 masterpiece Hajimete no Oto, the color of the sky, the smell of the wind, the depths of the ocean, even my song. They won't change. They'll stay just how they were then, the way I was at the first sound. People change. The times change. But the art is still there, and moreover, our memories are still there. You can't go back to how things were, but you can remember. You can partake in your nostalgia, maybe even share it with someone else if you're so lucky. Sometime in the past few years, VTubers took over the world. And while I kinda hate them in principle, there was a period when I was a true believer in VTubers because I felt a sort of kinship with them. I tuned into their karaoke streams and would hear them sing Uninstall, Butterfly, Sosei no Aquarion, and other such gems from my Nico Nico Doga-infested childhood. Not just that, a whole bunch of them sang Vocaloid, the old Vocaloid, my Vocaloid. I realize now that this is for a pretty simple reason. A lot of those girls are the same age as me, maybe give or take a couple years. They probably grew up watching the same things, loving the same things. Hell, Aski literally is a new Taitei I've listened to since middle school. I was sharing in the same nostalgia as them. At that moment, in those days during COVID when I had nothing better to do than watch Luna, Miko, Sora, and Aski all day, I felt my connection to the past revitalize. It was like I was a kid on Nico Nico Doga again. Whenever one of the girls would sing a song I recognized, many of which I hadn't heard in years, I felt a joy akin to hearing them for the first time. While I don't really watch many VTubers anymore, I realize instead that as much as the world and we ourselves change, the music does not. We can always say hello to it, maybe even appreciate it with a different perspective of adulthood. I say it's remembering, but really it's more than that. Watching those VTubers in quarantine, I realize that it's something far more tangible. While I'm neither a child, high schooler, nor college student, I'm still there, age 22, getting into hall life for the first time in COVID. I'm still there, age 21, when the Kagura Project's story finally ended. Age 16, playing Rolling Girl together with my upperclassmen on the violin before school. Age 14, crying myself to sleep to glow when my grandmother died. And age 10, listening to Fear Garden for the very first time. Today, I am age 25, writing this essay while listening to Hajimete no Oto, and someday this too will be a memory, a still with which I can close my eyes and dive back into. When Lost Time Memory came out, I was 15. I listened to its iconic choruses referring to the main character, Shintaro Kisaragi, as an 18-year-old boy, and remember wondering if I would still be listening to and loving the Kagura Project when I too turned 18 someday. An adult now, I realize that I will probably listen to Lost Time Memory forever. Odds and Ends and Unknown Mother Goose were all about this. They were about remembering your love, holding it in your heart even after it's passed you by, fresh as the moment you first captured it, told from the perspective of two adults who, like me, were largely past Vocaloid. I confess additionally here that I really love Vocaloid. I'll always love Vocaloid. I love each wonderful memory and each of the awful times too. And this love will keep pulsing in my chest even into the future, even as I listen to Vocaloid less and the people I know and the things I love change. There's a video that came out in 2013, the same year as Summertime Record, called Dear Hatsune Miku from me. It shows Miku moving through time, meeting first her fellow Vocaloid, then the Idolmasters cast, the Toho characters at Hakone Shrine, and some of the most prevalent Jutao. Miku keeps moving through time, high-fiving the characters and memes that were popular on Nico Nico Doga through the years. Eventually, though, all of those things go away, sinking into the darkness of the past. Miku passes Kaito and Meiko, saying her goodbyes to them as she moves onto one final corridor of a collection of Nico's finest, the future having left the two who started it all behind. At the end, Miku falls, but is supported by Reimu and Haruka, who both thrust her into a new day. Vocaloid, the Idolmaster, and Toho once being the main pillars of Nico Nico Doga's subculture. Light floods the darkness and everyone gathers to say goodbye to Miku, who alone persisted through everything and continues to live on now. Specters of the past, images of people's love, smile for the girl who still shines, who grew up and out of Nico Nico Doga and into stardom. I realize that I'm clapping among that crowd. I realize that Miku and Vocaloid are something else now and not mine to love. However, I am who I am because of Vocaloid. A child who found the world interesting, a teenager who loved its stories, and now an adult who will love something else someday. I, likely, will not be by Miku's side as she seizes the future. But even so, as she walks past me, I too can only say one thing. Thanks.